Hello, and welcome back to, I'm Lana Dingwall, and I'm here with Robert Kwong, depending on how you guys know us, but we are continuing with our weekly conversations around power, privilege, identity, everything in between, and really just trying to have conversations around topics that we feel like we don't have a lot of conversations around. And our objective is that through Robert and I talking, we can maybe help you ask yourself some questions, maybe help you have some clarity, or most importantly, maybe inspire you to have similar conversations with people that you know. Because Robert and I, what we talk about is not right, it's not wrong. And the idea is that everything sort of falls in the in-between. And we just want to share our perspective on stuff. Robert, you were saying before we hopped on this that you had like a kind of like a theme that you wanted to talk about today. So I'll let you introduce
Yeah.
the theme or the conversation topic for today.
Well, yeah, I think it's something that's been permeating around me, and something I know we've sort of talked about in kind of building ideas and things like that, which is about the experience of burnout. I also just kind of call it like general overwhelm sometimes. And especially in thinking about the topics that you and I both like to discuss. I think one that comes up with like a lot of anxiety and fear, I would say even, is like I care about these things, but I can get very overwhelmed. It will be too much. And also just in life, I think a lot of people have experienced what it's like to have like burnout, where your fuel tank just runs dry. I think in circles that we typically care about, that gets talked about a lot. It's like how do you have sustainability in this work that's knowingly very tough. It's not always about the destination, it's about moving forward. And how do you keep up with it? So I think it's like a very, definitely for me, I've heard a lot of people uh, being concerned about that, who really do the hard work or frontline work. Is another thing that gets talked about a lot. So yeah, I really wanted to know. You had to ask me so many brilliant questions, so I have them for you now. In our own experiences as coaches and just as people, what has come up uh, kind of regularly for you, either working with clients or just connecting with people, that has to do with like burnout and things like that? I'm really curious about what people have, what your data is on this.
Oh, that's a really good question. I would say, and I was actually reading about this morning too. I think one of the biggest things that I come up against around burnout is it's sort of two factors. One is in a business coaching context, which is obviously a lot of conversations I have with people, which can parallel also how we live our lives. But part of the burnout comes from making an assumption around what works for someone else will work for us, or someone else's path is our path. The burnout can come from that, of trying to, essentially, it sort of feels like you're trying to like fit a circle into a square or a square into a circle. And a lot of the burnout comes down to not really understanding ourselves enough to truly know how to care for ourselves and support ourselves in a way that makes sense. And also, we don't know ourselves enough to know how to build out a life or a business that's actually in alignment with who we are versus the people we admire. So a lot of us, we try to replicate the lives of people that we really look up to or we really admire without missing the key piece of data, which is that ultimately we're just different people, and what works for them might not work for us, or what they are building or striving for might not be for us either. And you see that a lot in the activism community as well. We really like to think that there's one way to do something. So burnout can feel and come from that. And then I think the other side of it is, I see this a lot in the coaching industry. I've done it a lot myself. So I also, maybe I'm just really good at identifying in other people because I do it myself. But it's this notion that we try to fix other people to bypass our own healing. And it's also around this space of, which is part of what I was reading this morning. Like, we all know, and we've all been taught, where it doesn't matter what religion or culture or background that you come from. In a North American context, we are told a lot to essentially treat others the way we want to be treated, love thy neighbors the way we would love ourselves, essentially. And I find the gap in that is that a lot of us don't actually know how to truly love ourselves. We don't actually know how to truly show up for ourselves. And for many of us, we end up trying to fill that void by giving more to others or showing up more for others in hopes of learning that somehow through becoming a martyr, as an example, and giving someone our whole heart and loving them unconditionally and to an extreme, that somehow we'll figure out how to show up for ourselves. And we often don't. And then what ends up happening is that's when the burnout and the overwhelm comes. And then we start to feel upset and frustrated and overwhelmed because we're not getting the right support that we need. And ultimately, the whole messiness of that, it really does come down to we try to skip the work that we need to do and instead do it for others. And so you see that in the coaching community, where there's a lot of the coaching community is full of very broken people, because we are all broken people. We're all broken people, so like we're all broken. But in the coaching community, there's a lot of us. And what can happen is that some of us try to bypass our own healing journey by trying to fix others. And that creates a lot of overwhelm and stress because we're constantly fighting against imposter syndrome. We're constantly fighting against not being enough. And we're constantly fighting against not having enough in our cup to pour into someone else's. You see it in the spiritual community. It's what spiritual bypassing is, where we try to bypass our own healing or our own pain or our responsibility in causing someone else's pain. And we try and bypass that through whatever spiritual means it is. And so I find that those things are often heavily in the zone of how you might be operating when you feel really burnt out, especially in the coaching community. And yeah, it just comes down to we're trying to like use other people as a proxy for our own healing versus taking the time to actually heal ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. So many of our subconscious like motivations for things get heightened the longer we fine tune our craft and our work, I think. And I think that's like part of the journey to me that's like healthy, but it can be very uncomfortable. And when I think about burnout, I also think about the idea of like achieving this or getting here at any cost, which to me is like a very common way of pursuing something that you want. And now I guess my tune is like, I think it's a good idea to get as clear as possible to what it might take or what it might cost to achieve such a objective. And those things actually I think are very well suited for like a coaching partnership, to be honest. But like so often the culture of grit is something that's very attractive, I think, still to most people, especially if people have like ambition and they're very much have a part of their life that's very work oriented or just like, yeah, just impact oriented life. And yeah, it's tricky because I think a lot of us are way more, I would say we're probably a lot more sensitive than we like to admit. So doing a lot of this work, it's like we know it's tough, but then it gets like tough. And another thing that I've definitely noticed is like the practice and the struggle of not just asking for help, but allowing, like being able to receive the help. That's something I've definitely struggled with, even though I definitely do a lot of work where I might be on the other end of it, very eager and very willing to partner up and provide or support. But I also need the same thing. But there are times when it's tricky. And if I'm not careful, that's when you kind of suddenly need a lot more time to get back up, which is generally the thing that's like tough for me. Mm-hmm. Try not to have to experience burnout so that like the time it takes to recover from that is sometimes takes a bit of your time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, it's an ebb and flow. Like it comes in waves. And I think for a lot of us, especially in the coaching space, we hold ourselves to a very high, unobtainable, unrealistic standard, which is that I also have to have all my shit together always in order to be able to hold space for others. And that's really not how it works, because ultimately, like, we're never actually going to get rid of our shit. You know, our neurotic tendencies, the things that we don't like about ourselves, the things that we struggle with, our demons, they're going to be with us forever. It's just really about learning how to not allow them to have so much control. But in this industry, what we can do is try to pretend that we don't have any like neurotic tendencies, that we don't have any faults, that we don't struggle, that we don't suffer from sadness or disappointment or any of these other things, because we feel it comes at the cost of our identity. And our identity is we're supposed to have all of our stuff together. Our identity is that we're supposed to be in a certain place because that's why other people are coming to us for support. And that can sometimes be the thing too that traps us. And the overwhelm can be like a slow burn of just constantly just not feeling like we're enough or that we're an imposter, but then never actually addressing it. And the reality is, if we just address it, that's how we feel, get the support we need, have this space to not have to show up as our like coach persona, but have this space to show up as, like, for me, my just Lana, like not Lana when she's coaching or talking to someone or recording something, but we all have these variations of who we are. And it's really about finding a way to create space for all of us to be able to show up. We don't have to show up as all of us in every moment, because as we've talked about, it's not really possible. But we need to make sure that we have a space for the stressed out, overwhelmed, not enough part of us to get the support that part of us needs, so that part of us can kind of be like, okay, cool, I got my attention, I got my support, I can go away now for a few more weeks. Yes, like, see you when this cup's run dry. But again, I find that there can be stigma and shame around acknowledging that we need support. And I know personally I struggle with this profoundly. And because we can get stuck in feeling like we're a certain persona, and anything that counteracts that persona is a threat against who we think we are. But in reality, the threat is just another version of us that needs to be addressed and needs to have space held for them so that they can stop freaking out a little bit.
Oh yeah, that so resonates with me. And I know we knew this, that we both can struggle with the receiving aspect and all that. So like definitely solidarity there. Although we've been working on it. I will say that. I'm very proud of us.
We've gotten better, and that's what these conversations are for too.
Yeah, I think we've improved, and I will mark that and acknowledge it. And another question I had that might be interesting is, like, I've definitely had periods where I wasn't even aware that I was experiencing like a more prolonged, it felt like a more existential form of like fatigue. And it took me a while to even knew that that's what was happening. It was like I was going through life that like how I normally would and operating how I normally would. And it took me a while to even notice the signs, I guess, that I needed to address something in a different way. So I'm curious how, like, what are some ways you've been able to clock or develop awareness around when you might be coming close to burnout, and knowing like when it's time to in fact like do the outreach. I'll say for me, I've had to think about the signs, but why don't you start? I'm curious.
I think for me, one of the signs is it's just, I understand my process. I understand like my cycles, because I take time to try and understand them, because I've gone through them enough times. And for me, one of the parts of the cycle of knowing that I need support or need to reach out is that things that before really fueled me and that I would get excited about seem really challenging and hard. And so for me, that could be something in a practical way. That could be not feeling super excited about client calls, even though I absolutely love my client calls. It could be not being excited about recording a podcast episode or doing something like this, like the types of things that I do in my work that really make me come alive and I absolutely love doing and feels more like I'm gaining energy by doing it than I am giving it out. But when it starts to feel like those things are a hurdle that I have to jump over, that is often a sign that I'm starting to feel drained because the things that I know I enjoy are becoming something that seems just like an extra added thing on my list of to-dos, which is a sign to me that I'm not really experiencing a lot of joy or excitement in my day, which is obviously a sign that something's off. So it's usually when I start to feel that, and I usually give it a few days because we all just have those days where you wake up and you're just not into it, and that's okay. But if I find that I go through, say, a week or a few consecutive days of that, I start to take it really seriously. But part of me too is I don't cycle through that as much because I always make sure that I have multiple coach mentors who like mentor and coach me. Obviously, Robert, we met because we were in a group. That's where we met. So I take really seriously making sure that I have the right support in place. That way, when I start to experience those cycles, I already have the people I need. And it's just a matter of booking in a call with them or reaching out to them or having a conversation with them versus staying stuck in there and then trying to find some new relationship person can help me. Because usually when I'm already in that part, looking for someone to help me is just, again, another added stressor. So as long as I already have those things there, it's just a matter of reaching out versus trying to create something that doesn't exist.
Yeah, totally. And we're so lucky to be living lives. We're expanding our support network. I mean, that's something that, as much as I have had struggle with asking for help, I have noticed and acknowledged how important it is to recognize people who can support us in a way that's like not a negative for anyone in particular, and just really leaving my mind open to be like, I have options for dealing with the situation that I'm trying to navigate. And sometimes I might not even know what the problem is, but I definitely have people that I can navigate this so that I don't have to be alone during like the toughest moments. And that's been such a reward in and of itself. Um, yeah, for me, it's like, I would say it's similar. Uh, there probably could be like, people in the psychotherapeutic field who would be quick to correct me, but last time I checked about prolonged things that you should clock and potentially diagnose, for example, it would be like something like experiencing like insomnia for 2 weeks or being in a depressive state for about 2 weeks. So you're absolutely right that, what we're talking about is different than being like, I guess, alarmist in the ups and downs in a day, that we might experience that are relatively normal in its impact on us. But yeah, for me, it's definitely noticing if I'm continually experiencing a patterned way of not experiencing joy in what I'm doing. And sometimes things will start to become obligatory and things that I just have to get through for me. And so it's like this mindset shift of like excitement and my vitality in approaching something. And yeah, I guess if anything, I've gotten better at noticing that a little bit quicker so that I can sort of take care of myself and respond more accordingly. But it took time. I really thought the issue at first was like what I was doing rather than the way I do things. So I've tried so many different things, being like, well, I'm not experiencing joy doing this because maybe I'm meant to do something else. But in fact, it was a little deeper than that. It was in about like, oh, if I experience burnout, it's hard to enjoy much of anything unless I address whatever it is that's being neglected in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
So that took me a while to figure out. Because I've definitely, one thing about burnout is it's probably made me like run in a bunch of different directions. So um, only to realize it was about how I approached things, which was took a little more time and nuance to figure out.
Yeah. Well, I think the point you brought up is actually really important because a lot of the times when we feel that existential crisis style questioning, when we are experiencing burnout or overwhelm, it's this cycle that all of us get trapped in. Me hugely, like just as an individual, but also because I'm obsessed with the Enneagram as a 7. Like the root of my personality is to like escape. Like, if I'm feeling stressed or overwhelmed, it's like escape. Opportunity, freedom is out there, and what's out there is the solution to your problems and your pain over here. But I feel that that's how a lot of us live. And even with what you just described, a lot of us in the coaching industry, really any industry, so this all the time with my clients in entrepreneurship, we feel that when we are following our passion and when we are doing the thing that we're supposed to be doing, and that when we're in alignment with our purpose, that it's always supposed to feel great. And anytime we're met with resistance or hurdles or full-blown blocks, we can freak out and take it as a sign that I'm not on the right path. And so I have to figure out and change what I'm doing, because if I was actually in alignment with my work's purpose, I would feel better. And it's that trap that we get stuck in. And I'm saying this like, I have not figured this shit out. This is the epitome of my personal work, is trying to find fulfillment in what I have and what I'm doing by simply being present and more aware, versus making the assumption that my lack of happiness or fulfillment or not enoughness is because I'm missing something. And the thing that I'm missing is out there. So it could be I'm just not talking to the right clients, or I haven't figured out the right offer, or I haven't had the right experience, or I haven't met the right partner. And for you, with what you were saying, what I was hearing is like I'm just not doing the right work. If I was doing the right work, I wouldn't feel like this. And so we always think that the solution is outside of ourselves. Again, like culprit over here. So I have not figured it out. I love that you're laughing at me, Robert. I have not figured it out. But we just always assume that the thing that we're seeking is outside of ourselves. And that in and of itself is what causes a lot of the overwhelm, because we feel like we're doing something wrong. And the idea is you can be on the right path. And I have figured this out because I do in my like soul feel that I'm on the right path. I don't necessarily think that the work that I'm doing today is my life's purpose work, but I'm very confident that the work that I'm doing today is on the path of what becomes my life's purpose work. And I have to, become and do the things and learn the stuff to get there. It's a very long life journey. But I have to recognize that anytime I feel like that resistance or overwhelm, or I'm stressed out, or I feel disconnected from my work, it's not because of my work per se. It's probably because of me, something internal, some type of restlessness inside of myself that I actually have to address. And for me, it's trying to work on being present, being more grateful, recognizing that I'm often the source of my problems and woes, that often when I get the thing that was supposed to make me happy, all of a sudden it's not good enough anymore. And it's this perpetual cycle that I go on. And I can see this so much in coaching. And I see this so much with my clients is, again, we think once I get to X, this resistance or blocks or lack of fulfillment that I feel will disappear because this thing is the solution to all of my problems. But what ends up happening is we get that thing and we still feel sort of the same. And it's because it was never about the external thing. It was about the internal. And I think that that's what coaching is, right? Like coaching is really about trying to figure that out, which is why I love coaching as a profession. And I also love coaching as like a hobby. I think it's a really interesting field.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like the difference of me trying to navigate uh what am I doing wrong versus how am I being, which I think our being we talk about as coaching in coaching a lot. And because you're right, we get so externalized in how we evaluate like the quality of our life, basically. And that's so funny that you bring in like what's external, what's internal, because I would say like external changes, a lot of external changes can happen, but they tend to feel more like solid or of your own agency when it's driven by an internal revolution that affects your external decisions rather than letting your external factors influence your internal life and kind of having life happen to you, which is what I think of. And I definitely was that person. I really was like, and something you something you touched on made me feel very tenderhearted, I must say, which is like the tendency we go towards when we are experiencing this, like, I'm not sure what's wrong that's making me feel this way. You know, I definitely have felt that during when I was experiencing depletion and burnout. And immediately, sometimes my mom would be like, basically, what mistake did I make? You know, it's like, I didn't know myself well enough. I screwed up. Um, that would be, you know, self judgment. And that typically has made like course correcting burnout really hard because it comes from a very depleting way of trying to problem solve to begin with. But there was something you said in when you in your share that was that kind of had that language in there that really reminded me what a struggle that was for me, which is like trying to practice self improvement or gaining more wisdom by basically being not nice to myself and then being like I don't know why I don't feel rejuvenated or restored in the things that I'm doing. So um, certainly part of my work has been learning to receive and allow the same compassion that I would provide anyone else, and definitely people I would work with or partner in anyway. So, uh, like the common humanity thing, you know. And when I was thinking about like basically, oh, I'm experiencing burnout because I made a mistake. I used to think that a lot. Like basically, I'm doing this thing. I thought I would like it. I didn't. I don't know myself. That was my thought pattern. Took a while to shift that, but it's definitely gotten better.
Yeah, and you brought up a lot of things. I have to be like, I have to remember it.
Yeah.
What you were saying as well around the self-shame, guilt, around really recognizing you are the culprit behind a lot of your unhappiness. What I find interesting is that some people, when they hear that, they feel so empowered. And some people, when they hear it, they feel so shamed. And one of the things that I feel through like interacting with people is the people who feel empowered by those statements are often people who are traditionally a little bit nicer to themselves. So they hear, I'm the culprit of all of my unhappiness, and they are able to receive that with compassion in being like, and that's okay, because now it means we have the key to being happy. Just got to figure it out, support myself through it. And then there are people who, when they hear that, it really causes them so much shame because it's like, great, now here's another thing that I fucked up. Here's another reason why I'm not good enough. This is another thing that I haven't figured out. And their response lacks compassion, but it lacks compassion not because anything's wrong with them, but because they haven't figured out how to show themselves compassion. And it's with what you were saying. They can most likely extend compassion to others, and they probably are quite compassionate to other people. And it's just trying to apply that same type of softness that we tend to give people we really care about or a small child, and trying to cultivate that level of compassion and our understanding that we can have for ourselves. Because I know for me, one of the ways too that I try and separate it for people, because even being told, oh, it's just all you need to do is cultivate more compassion. I understand that for some people that can still feel so much like shame because, again, it's one more thing on their list of endless to-dos that they have to work on, and it doesn't feel empowering. And so one of the perspectives that I try to offer and that I remind myself is the difference between your highest self and, say, your ego, just in language terms. Your ego, we all have egos. Our ego often really masks itself as our intuition. And a lot of the times we feel like we're getting an intuitive hit, and it's quite negative. It's quite overwhelming, and it's very defeating. When we get an I'm using air quotes, our intuition will never sound belittling, shame-based, or angry or negative. Our intuition is rooted in love, which is rooted in like the highest self. And so a lot of the time, sometimes it's actually just recognizing that we already have the compassion there. Like we have the capacity to hold softness for ourselves. Our ego is just a little bit louder. And so we hear something and shame ourselves, and only the ego will shame you. Whereas your intuition and your highest self can still hold you to a really hard truth, but they'll do it in a gentle embrace. They'll do it in a way where it's still nurturing and it's still soft and loving and gentle, even if it's firm. Whereas the ego will be very, belittling, angry, negative. Yeah, like you're a piece of shit. Like you'll never amount to anything. Like that is your ego. Like your intuition will never speak to you like that. Your intuition would say to you, okay, that might not have been the easiest to hear, but you heard it. So first, congratulations, for making it this far. Like, how can we kind of work with this information now to get us out of where we are into a place that we want to be, whereas the ego just shames us. But I just wanted to bring that up because I know for some people, that's actually the issue they have with the coaching industry. Is there are groups of people who find the coaching industry so empowering, and then there are people who find the coaching industry so shame-based. Part of it is because there are shitty ass coaches out there that do try to empower you through shame tactics, which they're doing it intentionally, and I think it's kind of gross. And it's, if anything, it's a reflection of them and how they interact with themselves. But there's a lot of people in the coaching industry that are really empowering based, that are meant to give you the tools to help you understand yourself better. But some people can still find that very blamey and shame based. And I think that is just a sign around where we are at in our thinking. There isn't a right or wrong. It's just really recognizing how are you responding and getting curious around why you're responding that way. Not shaming yourself for responding a certain way, but just asking yourself the question, why am I receiving it like this? And is there a possibility that I could receive this with more like love and care for myself?
That's so important because you're right. I think there are, like with anything, to be fair, like stereotypes about coaching. And before I really dove into the nuance of it all, I had the same judgments about what I thought coaching was. So, like, very quickly, because I want to respect people's time, but just what you said was so important in that to separate what feels like intuition, but that comes from ego and a place of you're not enough, you're incomplete, broken perhaps, and that's why we look into the external factors, because it's sort of like, it's almost like, well, that's as good as it gets if you're just a broken person. It's like you just try to change the curtains, like the curtains of your life. But from intuition, there's so much more space when I generally feel it. Generally, there's like a lot more excitement uh, sometimes I can get too excited, but it's still definitely better than like doing it in a punishing way. And specifically in like, from my experience in coaching, the part where people are really laying out the structure of like a project, for example, the part I historically struggle with is like, uh, what are your name all your resources that will help you in this objective, and then generally it's like how are you going to reward yourself as you make progress in your project or objectives. Like classically I struggle with that, and I've just noticed that a lot of people do. So it just took a while. It's like at first I even thought like I that I don't want it, but it's actually because I'm just so not out of practice with it. Like it's like working out a new muscle or something. I just wasn't used to having. I wasn't used to, I guess, allowing myself to think in that way. But I think that part was related to more to intuition than ego. It was like, oh my gosh, like giving myself the space to have built-in resources, which can be like human resources, like people, and then actually allowing yourself to experience like the reward of completion, but intentionally doing so. Those are very hard things for me. But I also felt like the more I did that, the more I was able to open up my perspective on all of these things. So that's just like one thing I've noticed when people experience burnout. For me, definitely, it was like, oh, yeah, I experienced burnout also because it was like I was so driven to get to whatever destination I was. I didn't even think about like treating myself along the way and getting very clear on like what kind of support is already available. And oftentimes I don't see all the different forms of resources I have, because I'm just like so like I got to do this, I got to do this. It's all on me, and da da da. And so yeah, that just what you shared was so tender that I just wanted to share that. And definitely I would say for this is one area where I do think coaching can have a lot of benefit in the coaching partnerships, because frequently I would guess that people come to us who understand burnout and what it's like to live a life of deprivation sometimes, even though they want wonderful things and they're capable, resilient, intelligent, and all of that. So this is definitely a topic that I keep thinking about, and hopefully something that we will keep thinking about going forward as well, because I know a lot of people, particularly in service and activism, uh, that this is an ongoing conversation that's important for every individual who takes up work where they have to be really thoughtful about this. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing all that. And I think even with what you were saying around the intuition piece for you, it's just that gentle reminder of, oh yeah, I need to build out my resources to support myself when these things start to happen so that I have the support that I need. That is an act of compassion towards yourself, right? Like understanding that sometimes we need help. Most of the time we need help, and that's totally okay. And that's normal. And I know because we're talking about coaching and activism, a lot of the themes that come out of people that you and I really admire and respect is really about recognizing that ultimately we will not heal ourselves through the attempt of healing and supporting others. All that does is stretch us even thinner, and recognizing that in a compassionate way, we actually owe it to ourselves because we are worthy and deserving to get the support that we need to fill up our own cups, to work on our own healing, to work on our own hopes and dreams and goals. The same way that we do that for others, we need to find ways to show up and create those resources for ourselves. Because ultimately, it's like that whole external thing that we are talking, internal, external. The only way we're actually going to get to a place where we feel full and alive is if we've done like our own inner work. And it's often like an onion. I know for myself, every layer I get, the deeper I get, the more I know that there's way more layers to go. Like you never finish. And the point is not to finish. The point is more to kind of be curious and ask yourself, what's next? Like, what new thing am I going to learn about myself? Oh, what new like trauma have I not uncovered or unpacked yet that's like going to come up? Like for me, the part of it is just trying to find a way to have fun with it a little bit so that it feels less heavy. The heaviness for me personally is what causes the shame. If I can find a way to be a little playful about it, it feels less intense to have to deal with, which then in turn makes it easier for me to address that I have a problem to begin with and that I actually actively need help. And I think for anyone in this space or this industry, and anyone who's even you're not in this space or this industry, it's really just recognizing we all need various levels of support. And it's our responsibility to ourselves to find ways to create those support systems for us so that we can go out and do the work that we're meant to do. The more that I work on myself, the more that inner work is reflected in my outer work, and the more powerful the outer work becomes. Like the more success my clients have, the greater my impact is, the further my reach is. All of those things are reflections of my inner world versus the opposite. Those things don't make me feel whole. It's because I feel whole while still working on not feeling whole, because it's a balancing act. But the more that I feel great inside, the more that is actually reflected externally. And it took me a really long time to realize that it went that way. Because for so long I thought it was the opposite. So, and I know that you know that too. So it's just like sharing that with other people is recognizing we all have our struggles. Everyone has fears and insecurities and doubts. And we just might be doing a lot of behind the scenes work that you don't see. That's why you might assume that people like Robert and I don't struggle, but we do, which is why we're having these conversations to begin with, is we want to highlight more the struggles that we have in hopes that it empowers you to acknowledge your own.
Yeah, and you don't have to be alone through all this. So yeah, when you were talking about like the layers and stuff, I was like, yeah, we're big fucking onions. What can I say? So
like onions, you cry a lot when you actually, I don't know if you can see my shirt right now, but it says like,
oh, you have really great shirts. Yeah, All Habits Cry Hard. I love it.
And it's like a butterfly with like a third eye crying tears.
Real quick, the hat that you wear, Occupied Mind.
Yeah.
I actually like wrote that down because it made my brain go. I was like, the mind is colonized. I was like, ooh, this is interesting. So you have a lot of great apparel, apparently.
Yeah. This is actually that company.
Oh.
Same thing. Free the Occupied Mind.
Free the Occupied. Yeah. Maybe another conversation, but yeah, that one like totally made my mind go places. And yes, definitely more, yay to more conversations. With black and white.
Yeah, it's just everything starts with a conversation. Yeah. Well, thank you, Robert, for having this conversation with me.
Yeah.
And thank you to everyone that watched it. We appreciate you. Let us know if there's a topic or if you ever want us to elaborate on something, either publicly in this type of forum or privately. You're always more than welcome to reach out to us. And we'll catch you next week. Get that support you need. And we'll talk to you next week. Bye.